Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller, here to lead you through tonight's chilling journey. If you find these stories help you unwind or gently guide you to sleep, consider supporting the channel by liking this video and subscribing if you haven't already. It truly helps bring more of these stories to you. Also, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and the time where you are. It's always fascinating to connect with listeners around the world. So, take a deep breath, settle in, and prepare yourself for a night of mystery and suspense. It was a little past midnight when my phone buzzed. Groggy and disoriented, I glanced at the screen. It was my best friend, Lisa. "Why is she calling this late?" I muttered, answering the call. "Hello?" There was silence at first, just her shallow breathing. "Lisa, are you okay?" Then her whisper came through, trembling and barely audible. "I need you to stay on the line." My pulse quickened. "What's going on?" "There's someone in my house," she said, her voice cracking. I think they broke in." I sat up in bed, wide awake now. "What? Did you call the police?" "I can't. My phone is almost dead and I called you first. Please, stay with me," she begged. Okay, I'm here. Where are you?" "I'm hiding in the closet in my bedroom." I could hear her breathing, fast and uneven. I tried to keep my own voice calm, though my heart was pounding. "Lisa, listen to me. Lock the closet door if you can, stay quiet, and don't hang up. I'll call the police for you." "No," she hissed. "Don't hang up. He'll hear me if my phone buzzes. Just stay on the line, please." I swallowed hard. "Okay, I'm here. Do you know where he is?" There was a long pause before she whispered, "I think he's downstairs." I can hear him moving around. He's opening drawers and cabinets, like he's looking for something. The idea of someone rummaging through her house in the dead of night sent a chill down my spine. "Do you have anything in the closet you can use to defend yourself? A hanger? A shoe?" She let out a shaky breath. There's a baseball bat. It's my brother's. But I don't think I could." A loud crash in the background made both of us jump. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He's coming upstairs." "Lisa," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you need to stay as quiet as possible. Don't make a sound. I'm here, okay? I won't let anything happen to you." The silence stretched, broken only by faint creaking noises. Footsteps. They were getting louder, closer. My own breath felt loud in my ears as I strained to hear over the call. Then her whisper, barely audible. "He's in the hallway." My blood turned to ice. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, that the intruder would leave, that I'd wake up from this nightmare. But I couldn't lie to her. The footsteps stopped. She stifled a gasp. He's outside my door." "Lisa," I whispered, my voice shaking, "don't move. Don't make a sound." A long, agonizing silence followed. My ears strained for any noise, my mind racing with every possible scenario. Suddenly, the sound of the closet door creaking open filled the call. "Lisa!" I screamed, but all I heard was her terrified whisper. "How did you know I was here?" Then the line went dead. The silence on my end was deafening. I tried calling her back, but there was no answer. Panicked, I grabbed my car keys and drove to her house. The streets were eerily empty, and the usual comfort of the streetlights felt cold and lifeless. When I arrived at her house, everything looked normal. The lights were off, the door was closed, and there was no sign of a break-in. I hesitated before knocking on the door. No response. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. The house was pitch black inside, save for the faint glow of the moonlight filtering through the windows. I called out for her, my voice echoing in the silence. "Lisa, it's me. Are you here?" No response. As I moved further into the house, I noticed something strange. The living room was untouched, the kitchen spotless, no signs of a struggle or a robbery. It was like no one had been here at all. But then I reached the stairs. There were muddy footprints leading up, heavy and uneven. My heart raced as I followed them, each step feeling like it could be my last. When I reached her bedroom, the door was ajar. "Lisa?" I whispered. No answer. I pushed the door open, and my stomach dropped. The room was empty, but the closet door was wide open. Inside, the baseball bat she'd mentioned lay on the floor, untouched. And then I saw it. On the wall, scrawled in something dark and sticky, were the words, "You should have called the police." I stumbled back, my blood running cold. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye. A figure standing in the corner of the room, barely visible in the shadows. It stepped forward, just enough for the moonlight to catch its face. It wasn't Lisa, and then everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in my own bed, my phone buzzing incessantly. I checked the screen. It was a notification from Reddit. It read, "Welcome to r/Forgotten Threads. Post your memory now." I've always been a lurker on Reddit, creeping through the depths of the internet for horror stories, urban legends, and the occasional mystery to spice up the monotony of daily life. But it wasn't until a late, sleepless night that I stumbled upon a subreddit that was different. It didn't have a flashy name like r/NoSleep or r/Let's Not Meet. Instead, it was something cryptic, almost nonsensical, r/Forgotten Threads. The subreddit was mostly inactive, its posts few and far between, but every thread had hundreds of comments, most of which had been deleted. The descriptions in the few visible posts didn't give much away, users describing strange occurrences or something that followed them back. One post stood out. Its title was just a single word, "Remember." Curious, I clicked. The post had no body text, only a series of random-looking letters, almost like a code. Below, one comment was still visible. "Once you read, you can't unread." I laughed it off as an attempted creepypasta, but a chill still crawled up my spine. Against better judgment, I scrolled further. There was nothing overtly alarming, but the comments that weren't deleted were strange. Users begging for help, warning others to stop scrolling, or leaving incoherent phrases like, "It knows you're looking now." Then the screen flickered. I told myself it was just my old laptop acting up. Still, a strange paranoia started creeping over me, like I wasn't alone in my apartment anymore. I closed the browser and shut the laptop, vowing to get some sleep. That's when I noticed it, the faint hum of static. It wasn't coming from the laptop or my TV, but from my phone. I picked it up, but the screen wouldn't turn on. The sound grew louder until it abruptly stopped, replaced by a single notification ping. I forced the phone on and saw a new Reddit notification, despite having turned off all notifications for the app months ago. It was from r/Forgotten Threads. "Thank you for joining us. Post your memory now." My stomach dropped. I hadn't joined the subreddit, or so I thought. Checking my account, I saw the proof. I was a member. The dread started to grow. Against better judgment, I opened the app again. The subreddit had a new post at the top, this time titled, "Your Turn." It was by a username that looked eerily similar to mine, but with a subtle misspelling. The post had no content, just my name in the comments, my real name. I slammed my phone down, suddenly very aware of every creak and groan in my apartment. The quiet hum returned, this time from every corner of the room. It wasn't coming from a device anymore. It was in the air, almost like the walls themselves were vibrating. The lights flickered, and I felt my heart race. I couldn't stay here. Grabbing my jacket and keys, I ran out of the apartment, not caring about the late hour or where I was going. The night outside was cold and unnervingly still. As I made my way down the empty street, my phone buzzed again. I ignored it, shoving it deep into my pocket, but the buzzing became incessant, constant, unending. Finally, I pulled it out and saw another notification. "Don't run. We just want to remember." I hurled the phone into the bushes and kept moving, heading for the only place I could think of, the 24-hour diner at the corner. I sat in the brightly lit room, surrounded by strangers and the comforting clatter of plates and silverware. For a moment, I felt safe. That was until I noticed the other patrons. No one was eating. They were all staring at me. Their expressions were blank, eyes glassy, mouths slightly open as if they were waiting for something. The waitress walked over, placing a glass of water in front of me without a word. Her name tag didn't have a name, just the word, remember. Panicking, I stumbled out of the diner and into the night. The streets were empty now, unnervingly quiet. My phone was gone, but I could hear it ringing faintly, its tone echoing from nowhere and everywhere. As I ran, streetlights flickered out one by one behind me, plunging the world into darkness. Finally, I found myself at the edge of the woods, breathless and terrified. In the distance, a faint glow appeared, just like the light from my laptop screen when I'd opened that cursed subreddit. I don't know why I walked toward it. Maybe curiosity, maybe fear, or maybe something else entirely. Something pulling me, forcing me forward. The glow was coming from a clearing. In the center stood a large, ancient-looking tree, its branches twisted into unnatural shapes. Beneath it, people stood in a circle, their faces obscured, their bodies swaying in unison as they hummed that same low, haunting sound. One of them turned to me, lifting a hand and beckoning. Then I realized their face wasn't obscured. It was my face. I screamed, but no sound came out. The hum grew louder, drowning out everything as the figures advanced, their faces shifting and changing. Every one of them was me, wearing the same expression of fear and horror. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was the single word they all chanted, over and over. Remember. I woke up in my apartment, bathed in early morning light. My laptop was on the desk, open to Reddit, but our forgotten threads was gone. My account was intact, but there was no evidence I had ever joined the subreddit, or that it had ever existed. But I know it was real. Every night I hear that hum in the distance, growing louder as the clock ticks toward midnight. And sometimes, in my reflection, I catch a glimpse of someone else. Someone who looks exactly like me but smiles just a little too wide. For over a year, there had been one Instagram account that seemed to shadow my every post. No matter what I shared, a picture of my morning coffee, a sunset, or a random selfie, this account always liked it. Sometimes it even left generic comments like, nice shot, or looks amazing. At first, I didn't think much of it. People interacted on social media all the time. But as months passed, I began to notice the pattern. No matter the time of day or night, within minutes of posting, there was always that notification. @The real Luke liked your post. Curiosity eventually got the better of me. One evening, I decided to check out the account. To my surprise, it looked perfectly normal. It was filled with wholesome pictures of a young man, smiling selfies, snapshots with friends, and family gatherings during holidays. Luke, I murmured, scrolling through his posts. He didn't seem like the kind of person who would be obsessively lurking. His captions were lighthearted, often joking about life or tagging friends in memes. The more I looked, the more I convinced myself he wasn't some creepy stalker. Maybe he was just shy. Maybe he admired my content but never found the courage to reach out. Feeling a strange mix of flattery and curiosity, I decided to take the first step. I sent a simple message. Hi. Thanks for always supporting my posts. How's it going? I waited. Hours turned into a day, then 2. But there was no reply. I felt a little silly and brushed it off. Maybe he wasn't active in direct messages. About a week later, as I was scrolling mindlessly before bed, my phone buzzed. A notification. @The real Luke sent you a message. Excited but nervous, I opened it. My stomach dropped. It wasn't a reply to my greeting. Instead, it was a single image. A photo of my front door, taken at night. My heart raced as I stared at the screen. The angle was unmistakable. It was taken from my driveway. The porch light was on, casting eerie shadows, but no one was visible in the photo. Panicked, I threw on my slippers and rushed to the window, peering outside. The street was silent. My porch was empty. I grabbed my phone and texted back, "What the hell? Who are you?" The 3 little dots appeared, indicating he was typing. Then they vanished. No reply came. I started to dial the police, but stopped. What would I even say? Someone sent me a creepy photo of my own house? I double-checked the locks on my doors and windows, then tried to calm down. Just as I was settling back into bed, I heard it, a faint creak from downstairs. Someone was in the house. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. Slowly, I reached for my bedside lamp and turned it off, plunging the room into darkness. My phone was still clutched in my hand, the screen glowing faintly. The creaking continued, deliberate and slow, like someone was trying not to be heard. I didn't dare move. My mind raced, trying to remember if I had locked the back door earlier. Had I left the kitchen window open? Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. A new message from Luke. This time, it wasn't a photo. It was a video. Hands trembling, I tapped on it. The screen showed a live feed of my living room. The camera angle was shaky, but I recognized the layout immediately. The couch, the coffee table, the framed photos on the wall. And there, in the center of the frame, was a figure. A man dressed in black, wearing a hoodie that obscured his face, standing motionless in the middle of my living room. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. The video cut off after a few seconds, replaced by a single text, "Come say hi." I didn't think. I bolted for the window, yanked it open, and climbed out onto the roof. My heart pounded as I scrambled down the side of the house, nearly twisting my ankle when I hit the ground. I ran to my neighbor's house, hammering on the door until the porch light flicked on, and Mr. Johnson, still in his robe, answered. "What's going on?" he asked, concerned. "Someone's in my house," I gasped. "Call the police." When the officers arrived, they searched the house from top to bottom. There was no sign of forced entry, and no one was inside. But they did find something chilling. In the living room, on the coffee table, was a single Polaroid photograph. It was me, asleep in my bed, taken from the doorway of my room. I moved out the next day. Luke's account disappeared after that. No trace of him remained on Instagram. I'll never know who he really was, or how long he'd been watching me. But every so often, late at night, I hear faint creaks and footsteps outside my window, and I wonder if he's still out there, waiting.
It started innocently enough, a fleeting dream, vague and disjointed. I was in my room, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. Everything was normal except for the figure standing in the corner. At first, he was barely visible, a silhouette against the darkness. I couldn't make out his face, but I felt his eyes on me. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. Convincing myself it was just a nightmare, I tried to shake it off. But the dream came back. Every night it was the same. I'd be lying in bed, unable to move, while the man stood silently in the corner. He never spoke, never moved, but his presence was suffocating. It felt so real, more vivid than any dream I'd ever had. I started avoiding sleep, terrified of seeing him again. But exhaustion always won, and when it did, he was there. One night, I decided to confront him. In the dream, I forced myself to sit up and yell, "Who are you?" My voice was weak, trembling, but it was enough to make him step forward. As he moved closer, the shadows peeled away, revealing a face I didn't recognize. His features were ordinary, almost too ordinary, like a face you'd pass on the street and immediately forget. But his eyes, they were hollow, endless pits of darkness. "You know me," he said, his voice low and chilling. I jolted awake, gasping for air. My room was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, hiding just beyond the edge of the light. The dreams grew worse. He started appearing earlier in the night, before I even fell asleep. I'd be lying in bed, scrolling on my phone, and suddenly feel a cold prickle at the back of my neck. Looking up, I'd catch a glimpse of him in the corner of my eye, standing in the doorway or by the closet. I'd turn the light on, and he'd be gone. I tried everything to get rid of him, sleeping with the lights on, burning sage, even consulting a dream therapist. Nothing worked. One day, I decided to do some research. I scoured online forums, desperate for answers. That's when I stumbled across a thread titled, "Have you seen the man in the shadows?" My stomach dropped as I read post after post from people describing the exact same figure, always in the corner of the room, always silent, always watching. One user claimed he was a manifestation of unresolved trauma. Another said he was an entity that fed on fear. But one comment stood out. If he starts moving, it's already too late. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I stayed up, every light in my room blazing, and waited. The hours dragged on, and just when I started to think I was safe, the lights flickered. A wave of cold air swept through the room, and there he was, standing in the corner. This time, he wasn't silent. "You shouldn't have looked for me," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, paralyzed by an invisible force. He began to walk toward me, his footsteps slow and deliberate. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. He stopped at the foot of my bed and leaned down, his face inches from mine. "Now you'll never wake up," he whispered. When I woke up, or thought I did, it was morning. Sunlight streamed through the window, and the room looked normal. Relieved, I sat up and stretched, trying to shake off the lingering dread. But something was wrong. The room felt off, like it wasn't really mine. The walls were too bare, the furniture slightly out of place. Then I noticed my reflection in the mirror. I was still lying in bed. The version of me in the mirror wasn't moving. It stared back at me, eyes wide with terror. And behind it, in the shadows, the man was still there. I worked the night shift at a convenience store just outside of a small town. It's one of those places where nothing ever really happens. At least, that's what I thought when I first started. The store is old, with flickering fluorescent lights and a surveillance system that barely works. My job mostly consists of stocking shelves, ringing up the occasional customer, and trying to stay awake. But after a few months, I started noticing things. Small things at first. Items disappearing from shelves without anyone coming in, the sound of footsteps in the aisles when I was alone, and a persistent feeling of being watched. One night, it all escalated. It was around 2:30 a.m., the deadest part of the night. I was restocking the candy aisle when the store phone rang. The landline almost never rings, especially not at that hour. I hesitated before answering, but eventually picked it up. "Hello?" For a few seconds, there was only static. Then, a voice, a low, raspy whisper. "Don't look outside." I froze, my heart pounding. "Who is this?" I demanded, but the line went dead. Against my better judgment, I glanced toward the front windows. The parking lot was empty, bathed in the pale glow of the streetlights. But something felt wrong. The shadows between the cars seemed deeper, like they were shifting. I locked the front door. Around 3 a.m., the cameras started acting up. The screens flickered, and for a moment, I thought they were going to go out completely. But then, they stabilized. Sort of. On one of the monitors, I saw movement in the storage room. The storage room didn't have a back entrance. No one could have gotten in without me noticing. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure was tall and thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. It moved slowly, almost lazily, toward the door. My stomach dropped when the storage room door creaked open. I turned toward the door, holding my breath. But no one came out. The store was silent except for the hum of the refrigerators in the back. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a mop, and crept toward the storage room. The door was ajar, and the lights inside flickered erratically. I pushed the door open with the mop handle and stepped inside. It was empty, but something was wrong. The boxes I'd stacked earlier were scattered across the floor, as if someone, or something, had been rifling through them. In the far corner, I noticed a pile of crumpled receipts and candy wrappers that definitely hadn't been there before. As I backed out of the room, the door slammed shut behind me. I tried to convince myself it was just a prank, some local kid messing with me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The rest of the night was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., I practically ran to my car. I thought that would be the end of it. The next night, I came in for my shift, determined to act like everything was normal. But when I checked the security footage from the night before, my blood ran cold. Around 3:05 a.m., the cameras had captured something I hadn't seen at the time. A figure standing just outside the front door, staring in. Its face was obscured, but its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its hands were pressed flat against the glass. It stayed there for over an hour without moving. The sightings became more frequent after that. Customers started complaining about strange noises, whispers, footsteps, the feeling of being watched. One woman even claimed she saw someone standing in the candy aisle, only for them to vanish when she turned the corner. Then, one night, a delivery driver didn't show up for his usual drop-off. When I called his phone, there was no answer. The next morning, the police found his truck abandoned a few miles down the road. The back doors were wide open, and the supplies were untouched. There was no sign of the driver.
I wanted to quit, but I couldn't afford to. Bills don't pay themselves, and finding another job in this town was next to impossible. But last week, something happened that I can't explain. It was just after 4 a.m., and I was in the middle of mopping the floor when the lights went out. The store was plunged into darkness except for the faint glow of the emergency lights. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from the candy aisle. I froze, gripping the mop like it was a weapon. The growling grew louder, closer. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. There was no response. I backed toward the door, my eyes darting around the room. That's when I saw it, two glowing eyes staring at me from the darkness. They were high off the ground, too high to belong to any normal person. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I dropped the mop and bolted out the front door, not even bothering to lock it behind me. I haven't been back to the store since. I called my manager and told him I quit. Last I heard, the store is still open, but they're having trouble keeping employees. People don't stay long, and the night shift is always vacant. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all. But then I remember the security footage, the strange noises, and those glowing eyes. And I know I'll never set foot in that store again. I never believed in ghosts or anything paranormal. I always thought that people who claimed to hear strange noises or see shadowy figures were just imagining things or maybe even trying to get attention. But that all changed when I moved into my first apartment. It wasn't much, a small one-bedroom unit in an older building on the edge of town. The rent was cheap and the place was cozy enough. At first everything seemed normal, but after a few days, I started noticing something strange. It started with whispers. At night, when I was trying to sleep, I would hear soft voices coming from the walls. At first, I thought it was the neighbors talking through the thin walls, but it didn't sound like any conversation I'd ever heard. The voices were hushed, almost as if they were trying to stay hidden, yet they were impossible to ignore. I tried to brush it off, but they came every night. It was as though the walls themselves were alive, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. Sometimes I could hear one voice clearer than the others, low and raspy, like a man speaking in a language I didn't recognize. I would press my ear to the wall to listen, but the moment I tried to focus, it would stop. I started avoiding the bedroom at night. Instead, I spent most of my time in the living room, where the whispers didn't seem to reach. But even there, the air felt heavy, like something was watching me from the corners of the room. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront whatever was causing the whispers. Armed with a flashlight, I searched the apartment top to bottom, checking every nook and cranny. I looked behind the curtains, under the couch, and even in the bathroom. There was nothing. But then, I remembered the attic. The attic was off limits, a space that was only accessible through a small trapdoor in the ceiling of the hallway. I had never been up there before. It was locked, and the landlord had told me it was filled with old junk and wasn't safe to go into. But tonight, something pushed me to climb up there and see for myself. I grabbed a ladder from the utility closet and carefully pulled open the trapdoor. A musty smell hit me as I climbed into the attic.
The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing boxes, old furniture, and broken furniture. It seemed like any other forgotten space, abandoned and full of dust. But then, I saw it. In the far corner of the attic, there was a wooden box, ancient and covered in dirt. It looked out of place among the other things that had been left behind. It seemed familiar, as though it had always been there. I walked over to it, feeling an unnatural chill in the air. My heart raced as I reached for the box. It was heavier than I expected, but I managed to pry it open. Inside was a stack of old letters, their paper yellowed with age. But what caught my attention the most was the object on top of the letters, an old broken clock. The hands were frozen in place at exactly 3:17. As soon as I touched the clock, a sharp pain shot through my head. I staggered back, the whispers growing louder and more frantic in my ears. They weren't coming from the walls anymore. They were coming from the box. I tried to drop the clock, but my fingers wouldn't let go. The whispers turned into shrill voices, screeching at me in a language that made my skin crawl. The air in the attic grew colder, and the walls seemed to pulse, as though they were alive. The flashlight flickered and then went out. I was left in complete darkness, the only sound the deafening whispers that filled my ears. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor of the attic, the box and the clock gone. The whispers had stopped. The air felt normal again, but I could still feel a lingering presence. It was as if something had followed me back downstairs. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I couldn't. Who would believe me? And besides, when I tried to go back to the attic the next day, it was locked. The trapdoor had been sealed shut as if it had never been there. But I knew the truth. The whispers were real. They had been waiting for someone to listen, and now that I had, I couldn't escape them. I still hear them sometimes, soft and faint, like they're hiding just out of reach. But now I know they're not just in the walls, they're in my head, always waiting for the next moment when I'll listen again. And the worst part is, I don't think I ever will be able to escape. I've always been the type of person who worked late nights. Whether it was a shift at the office or just personal projects, I often found myself driving home after midnight, the streets mostly empty, save for the occasional car. It was peaceful, almost calming, except for one particular night. That night changed everything. It all started like any other late-night drive. I had been working on a project for the past few hours, and now I was exhausted. I climbed into my car around 2:30 a.m., just wanting to get home and collapse into bed. The air was cool, the roads were wet from an earlier rain, and the city was eerily quiet. I hit the gas and headed out, trying to focus on the road as the streets blurred past me. About 20 minutes into the drive, I noticed something odd. There was a black sports car behind me, not too close, but close enough that I could see its headlights in my rearview mirror. I thought nothing of it at first. Maybe the driver was just in a hurry, but something about the way they kept their distance felt strange. The car didn't change lanes. It just stayed there following me, no matter how fast or slow I went. I glanced at my speedometer. I wasn't speeding, and yet the car kept pace with me, never moving ahead but always staying just behind. At first I tried to shake it off. I figured it was a coincidence, maybe someone heading in the same direction. But the further I drove, the more uneasy I became. There was something off about the way the car followed me. It wasn't like any ordinary drive. I decided to turn off the main road, taking a smaller, quieter street. I told myself that if the car was still following me, it was probably just a coincidence. I made a few turns, trying to lose the vehicle. But when I glanced in my rearview mirror again, the black sports car was still there, tailing me. My heart started racing. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I turned into an even more desolate road, hoping the car would take a different turn. But it didn't. It just kept following me, always at a perfect distance. I could feel a knot tightening in my stomach, the eerie feeling that something wasn't right growing with every second. I pulled into an empty parking lot, thinking that if I parked, the car would drive off. But when I parked and looked in my rearview mirror, the black sports car followed me right in, its headlights blinding in the dark. My hands were sweating as I gripped the steering wheel. I knew something was wrong. Suddenly the car's engine revved loudly, and the black car accelerated toward mine. I panicked. I threw the car into reverse, slamming my foot on the gas. But the sports car wasn't backing off. It was coming straight for me, closing the distance rapidly. My mind raced, wondering if this was some kind of sick joke or if something worse was about to happen. I drove forward quickly, swerving to avoid the black car, but just as I did, it sped up and swerved with me, cutting me off at every turn. It was like the driver knew exactly where I was going, anticipating my every move. My hands trembled on the wheel, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the screeching tires. I couldn't breathe. In my panic, I made a sharp right turn, nearly losing control of the car. When I glanced back in the rearview mirror, I saw the black car stopped in the middle of the road, its headlights now off. For a moment, I thought maybe I had finally lost it. I slowed down, trying to calm myself, but as I passed the intersection, I saw something in the corner of my eye. The black car wasn't gone. It was parked at the edge of the street, just sitting there, waiting for me. I slammed my foot on the gas, not caring where I was going anymore, only wanting to get away. I didn't stop at any lights, didn't care about speed limits. My mind was consumed with the image of that black car, waiting. I took random turns trying to lose it, but it kept showing up, always one step behind me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I found myself back on a familiar road, the same route I had been on when this all began. I looked behind me. The black car was nowhere to be seen. I stopped the car and took a moment to breathe, my hands still shaking. I couldn't explain what had happened. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it, but it didn't add up. Who was driving that car? Why were they following me? And how had they known exactly where I was going? I told myself that maybe I had just been overtired, that it was all a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The fear I felt was real. The way the car had followed me, never speeding, always at the perfect distance. It was as though the driver knew exactly what I was going to do next. To this day, I don't know who was in that black sports car, but I can't shake the feeling that I wasn't just being followed. I was being hunted. And the worst part? Every time I drive alone at night now, I can't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see those headlights in the distance, waiting for me to make the same mistake again. It was a long drive. After nearly 8 hours on the road, I decided it was time to take a break. The gas tank was low, and the sun had already disappeared, leaving a thick darkness to settle over the highway. I pulled off onto a small exit, hoping to find somewhere to rest for the night. That's when I saw it. A faded sign for a motel, its neon lights flickering erratically, casting an eerie glow in the night. I didn't think much of it. I'd been traveling alone for hours and was exhausted. I pulled into the lot, which was empty except for a few cars. The building itself was old, the paint peeling from the walls, and the windows covered with thick curtains. Despite the rundown appearance, I figured it would do for a night's rest. I walked up to the reception, which had a strange, stale smell in the air. The old man behind the counter looked up at me, his face wrinkled and pale under the dim light. "Room for one?" he asked in a voice that sounded rough, as if he hadn't spoken in years. "Yeah, just for the night," I replied, handing over the cash. He nodded slowly, without saying much else, and handed me a key. The number on it was 13. I didn't think twice about it. Just a coincidence, right? I took the key and made my way to the room. It was on the second floor, at the end of a narrow hallway. The floors creaked under my feet with every step I took, the only sound in the building. The hallway lights flickered and hummed, casting strange shadows across the walls. As I opened the door to room 13, a chill ran down my spine. The room itself wasn't too bad, old but clean, with a bed, a small desk, and a TV that probably hadn't been turned on in years. Still, there was something about the room that made me uneasy. The air felt thick, almost suffocating.
I tried to shake off the feeling and unpacked my bag. I was tired, but something about the place kept me from settling in. I pulled the curtains back slightly to look outside. The parking lot was empty now, save for my car. The night was still and silent, the only sound, the occasional buzz of the neon sign in the distance. Just as I was about to lie down, I heard a faint noise. It was coming from the corner of the room, near the closet. It sounded like something, was moving around. I froze. I knew I was alone in the room. The door had been locked behind me, but the noise continued, a soft scraping sound, as if something, or someone, was shifting around in the closet. My heart began to race, and I slowly walked over to the closet, my hand trembling as I reached for the door handle. I held my breath as I pulled it open, expecting to find nothing but an empty space. But that wasn't the case. There, in the back of the closet, was a small wooden box, old and weathered. It had strange markings carved into it, symbols I didn't recognize. The box seemed out of place, like it didn't belong there. My curiosity got the better of me, and I reached in to pick it up. The moment my fingers touched the box, a cold gust of air rushed through the room, slamming the closet door shut behind me. I jumped back in shock, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked around, expecting to see someone or something, but the room was empty. I quickly set the box down on the bed and backed away from it. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I could hear faint whispers echoing in the corners of the room. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and then the lights above me flickered wildly before going out completely, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled for my phone to turn on the flashlight. When the dim light illuminated the room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The reflection in the mirror across the room wasn't mine. It was a shadowy figure, standing behind me, watching me. I turned around quickly, but there was nothing there. My breath came in shallow gasps as I backed toward the door. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was I imagining this? Had the long drive finally taken its toll? I couldn't stay in that room another second. I grabbed my things and ran out into the hallway. But as I did, I saw the old man from the reception standing at the far end of the corridor, just staring at me with empty eyes. "Room 13, he said softly, his voice a mere whisper. "No one ever leaves room 13. I turned and ran down the stairs, not daring to look back. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I sprinted to my car. I didn't even bother to lock the door. I just threw myself into the driver's seat and sped off, not stopping until I was miles away. I didn't want to think about the strange box, the figure in the mirror, or the old man's cryptic words. I never spoke about it to anyone, and I never returned to that motel. But every now and then, when I'm driving late at night, I can't help but feel like something is following me, lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to make another stop. And if I ever see a faded neon sign at the side of the road again, I'll keep driving, because I know that some places are better left unexplored. Some rooms are better left unopened. I had been on the lookout for a new phone for weeks. My old one was slow, the battery drained too quickly, and the screen had a few cracks that I had grown used to over time. So, when I found an ad online for a used phone, it seemed like the perfect deal. It was a model I had wanted for a while, and the price was right. The seller was a person named Jacob, who claimed to be selling the phone because he had upgraded to a newer model. I contacted him, and after a few exchanges, we agreed to meet at a local cafe the next evening. I was a little hesitant, but the phone was too good to pass up. When I arrived, I found Jacob sitting at a table near the window. He was a young guy, maybe in his mid-20s, with messy brown hair and a tired expression. He handed me the phone without saying much, just a quick nod and a, "Let me know if it works." I inspected the phone carefully. It looked fine, no scratches, no obvious damage. The screen was clean and it powered on without issue. I paid him and left, feeling like I had just made a good purchase. But as soon as I got home, things started to feel off. I set up the phone and started transferring my data from my old device. Everything seemed normal at first.
But then I noticed something strange. The wallpaper on the phone wasn't one that I had chosen. It was a photo of a street I didn't recognize, with an old, dilapidated building in the background. The kind of place that looked abandoned and forgotten. I thought it was a quirky feature of the phone, maybe something left over from the previous owner. So, I changed the wallpaper and shrugged it off. But then, strange things started happening. First, the notifications. Every now and then, I would get a random text message. It was always just a string of letters and numbers, and when I tried to respond or even open the message, the phone would freeze for a few seconds before automatically deleting it. It didn't make sense. The oddest part, though, was the phone's camera. When I tried to take a picture, it would always turn out blurry or distorted. But if I took a photo of a particular spot in my apartment, the corner near the window, the photo would always come out perfectly clear. It was like the camera was focusing on something invisible to my eyes. I tried it a few times, but each time the photo was identical, showing only the corner of the room with no apparent reason for it to stand out. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a faint noise, like a tapping sound coming from the phone. I picked it up to check, and the screen flickered to life. There was a new notification, no message, just a notification icon with a red circle and a number 1 next to it. Curious, I tapped on it. The screen went black for a moment, and then suddenly, a video began to play. It was shaky, as if filmed with a phone, and the sound was muffled. The video showed a man, Jacob, the person I had bought the phone from, walking through a dark alleyway. He was muttering to himself, but the words were incomprehensible. The video was blurry, but I could make out enough to realize he was speaking to someone, though no one was visible. Then, just as he turned a corner in the video, the camera jerked suddenly and everything went black. The screen of my phone went dark, and the notification icon disappeared. I was left in complete silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next morning I tried to do a hard reset on the phone, hoping to clear whatever was going on. But when the phone rebooted, it was as if it had never been reset. The photo gallery was still there, filled with blurry, strange pictures of places I didn't recognize. The notifications kept coming, even when I wasn't using the phone. Then one night, I woke up to the sound of a phone ringing. My phone, this phone, was on the nightstand, and the screen displayed an incoming call. The name on the screen was Jacob. I hesitated, my heart racing, but then I answered. The line was silent for a long time, and then I heard a voice, barely audible, as if it was coming from a great distance. "I told you, you shouldn't have bought it," the voice whispered. The call ended abruptly. I immediately turned the phone off and placed it in a drawer, but I couldn't forget about it. Every time I closed my eyes, I would see the blurry photos, the video of Jacob walking down that dark alley, and hear the strange whispering voice. I couldn't escape it. The next day, I decided to take the phone back to the cafe where I had met Jacob, hoping he could explain what was happening. When I arrived, I asked the barista if Jacob had been in lately. The barista looked at me with confusion. "Jacob?" he asked. "No one named Jacob works here. We've never had anyone by that name." My heart sank. I took the phone and threw it in the trash that very night, but I still feel the lingering presence of it. Every so often I find myself checking my phone, expecting a strange message or video, hoping it's over. But deep down, I know that whatever is connected to that phone is still out there, watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. It was a quiet, breezy autumn evening when I decided to take a road trip with my friends. The kind of trip where you drive out to an unknown destination, not really sure what you're looking for, but eager to find something new. We were heading to a small, obscure town for the weekend, just to get away from the daily grind. We had been on the road for a couple of hours when we saw a sign on the side of the highway. "Shortcut to Millersport, 5 miles." We had been driving for a long time, and the idea of saving time sounded appealing. Our GPS was showing that it would take us off the main highway and down a winding, narrow road. "Why not?" my friend Daniel said with a grin. "It's just a shortcut.
What could go wrong? The sun was beginning to set, and the sky painted shades of orange and purple. The road that we turned onto was a far cry from the smooth highway we had been traveling. The pavement was cracked, with weeds growing through the cracks, and the trees on either side grew thick, casting shadows that seemed to stretch longer as the evening wore on. The further we drove, the more the road seemed to narrow, until it felt like we were driving through a tunnel made of trees. I wasn't sure what it was about this road, but there was an unsettling energy in the air, the kind of silence that felt too still, as if something was just waiting. I glanced at my friends. They were chatting about random things, not noticing the change in the atmosphere, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "Hey, look at that," said Emily, pointing toward a small, dilapidated house at the edge of the road. The house was abandoned, the windows boarded up, and the door hanging off its hinges. It looked like no one had lived there in years. As we drove past, I saw something that caught my eye. There was a figure standing in the doorway, watching us. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly turned my head away, unsure if I had imagined it. "Did you guys see that?" I asked, my voice shaky. "See what?" Daniel replied, glancing over his shoulder. Someone was standing in the doorway," I said, but by the time we turned around to look again, the house was empty. There was no one there. "Maybe it's just your imagination," Emily said, laughing lightly. "It's an old house, probably just the wind." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The further we drove, the more isolated the road became. No more houses, no streetlights, no signs of life. Just trees, shadows, and the faint sound of our tires crunching over the gravel. Then suddenly, the car engine sputtered and stalled. "What the hell?" Daniel muttered, slamming the steering wheel in frustration. "This can't be happening right now." We tried to start the car, but it wouldn't budge. The engine refused to turn over, and the dashboard lights flickered before going completely dark. A sense of panic started to creep in. "We should walk to the nearest town," Emily suggested, but there was something in her voice that didn't sound as confident as before. We got out of the car and looked around. The only thing visible was the winding road behind us and the thick forest around us. It was eerily quiet. No sounds of animals, no wind rustling the leaves. Just silence. "Let's go back to that house we passed earlier. Maybe someone can help us," I suggested, though I wasn't entirely sure about going back to that creepy place. Reluctantly, we turned around and started walking. It didn't take long for us to reach the abandoned house again. This time, I felt even more uneasy, as if something was watching us, lurking just beyond the edge of the trees. The house was even more unsettling up close. The wooden structure creaked under the weight of time, and there was a smell of decay in the air. Emily hesitated at the door. "I really don't want to go inside," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "This place gives me the creeps." I nodded, feeling the same way, but we had no other choice. We needed help, and we needed it fast. We pushed open the door, which let out a long, drawn-out groan as it swung open. Inside, the house was even darker than I had imagined, the air thick with dust and the musty smell of old furniture. We stepped inside cautiously. The floorboards creaked beneath our feet, and the faintest sound of scratching echoed from somewhere deep within the house. "Is anyone here?" I called out, though I wasn't sure why. Who would be here? Just then, we heard the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut somewhere upstairs. The three of us froze. "Did you hear that?" Daniel whispered. Before anyone could answer, we heard footsteps, slow, deliberate steps, coming from the staircase. They were heavy, the sound of boots on wood echoing through the house. "Let's go!" Emily screamed, her voice trembling. We bolted out of the house, running down the overgrown path to the road. We didn't stop running until we were far away from the house. And when we finally stopped to catch our breath, we realized that the road had changed. What was once a narrow gravel path had transformed into something different. It was now paved, well lit, and appeared to lead straight into a town we had never seen before. "How is that possible?" Daniel said, his voice full of disbelief. That road was not like this. I looked back at the house, now far behind us. It was no longer there. In its place was an empty field, overgrown with weeds, and nothing else. No sign of the house. The town was quiet, almost too quiet. There were no cars, no people walking on the streets. It felt like we had stepped into a place that didn't belong to any time or space. We tried to find a place to stay, but every hotel and inn was either fully booked or abandoned. No one seemed to have any answers, and every person we spoke to appeared confused when we mentioned the shortcut. "There's no road like that," they'd say. "That road leads to nowhere." We spent the night in a rundown motel, but sleep didn't come easy. I kept seeing the house in my dreams, the shadowy figure standing in the doorway, watching me. When we finally left the next morning, the road that had led us to the town had disappeared. We were back on the main highway, as if we had never taken the shortcut at all. But deep down, I knew something was watching us from the trees, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we had ventured into a place that wasn't meant to be found. It was one of those quiet, lonely nights where I decided to unwind after a long day. I had just moved into my new apartment, a small but cozy unit on the edge of the city. The living room was dimly lit, the flickering of the TV providing most of the illumination as I settled on the couch. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. It was a routine night, watching a movie, relaxing, and trying to get some sleep before work the next morning. I had always been a fan of horror movies, so I picked out one of my favorites, something dark and atmospheric, to set the tone for the evening. As I settled in, the sound of the rain outside pattering against the window helped set the mood. The apartment was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that comes from living alone. No roommates, no distractions, just me and the soft hum of the television. As the movie progressed, the tension started to build. The characters were just about to explore an abandoned house when suddenly I heard a faint noise, like the soft thud of something falling in the other room. I paused the movie and sat up straight. It was strange. I couldn't tell if it was something I had imagined or if it was real. I waited for a moment, listening intently. The house was quiet. I brushed it off as the building settling or maybe something falling off a shelf. It wasn't uncommon for old buildings to make noises in the middle of the night. I resumed the movie, but then, just as the suspense was reaching its peak, I heard it again. Another thud. This time it was louder, and immediately after, I heard the unmistakable sound of a door creaking shut. I froze. It wasn't just the wind. The door was definitely closing. I thought maybe it was a gust of wind pushing it shut. But it felt different. Something about it was off. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me, especially with the horror movie I was watching. As I tried to focus back on the film, my two cats, who had been lying on the rug, suddenly became alert. I noticed them both staring intently at the far corner of the room, their eyes wide and fixed on something invisible to me. Their bodies were stiff, their fur slightly raised. The air seemed to grow colder, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. One of the cats, a sleek black one named Midnight, let out a low growl, a sound I'd never heard from her before. The other, a fluffy gray cat called Whiskers, started mewing softly, but there was an unsettling tension in the way she did it, almost as if she was trying to communicate with something I couldn't see. I leaned forward, glancing nervously toward the corner of the room where they were staring. The shadows were thick there, as the room was only dimly lit by the TV, but nothing appeared out of the ordinary. Still, something felt wrong. The silence in the room grew oppressive, like the space itself was holding its breath. The cat's behavior grew more erratic. Midnight began pacing around the room, hissing at nothing, while Whiskers remained fixated on that empty corner. I could hear her claws scratching against the floor as she slowly inched closer to the wall, her eyes never leaving the spot. I got up, trying to calm them both, but the moment I moved, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The air felt heavy, thick with an unease that I couldn't shake. "Hey, it's okay," I said. though I didn't even know what I was trying to reassure. I felt a cold sweat forming on my brow as I looked around, half expecting something to jump out at me from the dark corner. Just then, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Soft whispers like a distant conversation, but it was muffled and faint, as if coming from another room. My breath caught in my throat. It was as if someone, or something, was standing just beyond my reach, watching me. I turned the volume down on the TV, trying to concentrate, but the whispers didn't stop. In fact, they seemed to grow louder. The cats were no longer pacing, but staring straight at the wall, their fur bristling as they hissed low and menacingly. My heart was pounding in my chest as I began to feel the weight of the room pressing in on me. The air felt thick, the shadows too deep, and the whispers, now clear, sent a chill down my spine. They were speaking words I couldn't quite make out, but there was an undeniable sense of urgency in their tone, as if they were trying to tell me something. Suddenly I heard another sound. It was the unmistakable sound of something shifting in the darkness. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving toward me. My eyes darted around the room. I glanced at the door, and then to the windows, but there was no one there. The whispering grew louder and more frantic. Then, the door to the bedroom creaked open slightly. I hadn't heard anyone approaching it, and it wasn't the wind. This was different. The door didn't move on its own. It had been closed just minutes ago. I stood frozen, my heart racing. My cats, too, stood motionless, their eyes locked on the door. I didn't know what to do. My instincts told me to run, to get out of the apartment as fast as possible, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the door. The air was thick with something unexplainable. Every part of me screamed to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. And then, just as I was about to turn toward the door, the whispering stopped. Silence. Complete and utter silence. I finally found the strength to move, my feet carrying me toward the door. I grabbed Midnight and Whiskers, not caring how they reacted, and rushed to the door. Just before I left the room, I turned back for one last glance. The corner where the cats had been staring was now empty, except for something small and dark, sitting on the floor. It was a tiny black object, almost like a small figurine, but it was not something I had ever seen before. My heart skipped a beat. It was a black cat, sitting upright with its eyes staring right at me. But it wasn't a toy. No, this cat seemed alive, its eyes glowing in the dark. I slammed the door shut, the noise echoing through the apartment. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure. Something had been in that room with me. Something that I couldn't see, but that had been watching me all along. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, clutching my cats and listening to the silence. And I never looked at that corner of the room again. Thank you for joining me on this journey tonight. I hope you found some peace and comfort. Before you drift off completely, let me know in the comments what time it is where you are and which country you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. Until next time, rest well and sweet dreams.